Good morning and welcome to Bridge Church Online.
Good morning. We're so glad to have you with us this morning as we are in the last of our series on mental health and well-being. I'm Kori.
And I'm Jono, and we're so pleased to have you here this morning.
We are. Today we are thinking about the series that we have gone through, which has been on mental health and well-being, and all the lessons that we have learnt from that. Have you learnt any lessons over the last many weeks of lockdown?
Lessons of lockdown? Yes, that I rely on reading people's lips to understand what they say. With all these masks being worn these days.
Tricky.
Also, not to let you cut my hair with a beard trimmer. Harsh lesson.
Yeah, you did look like a monk for a few hours.
Yeah. What about you?
Many things. I learned that Joe Wicks doesn't know what an actual PE lesson is like. And he died. And many others besides.
He's been amazing, Joe Wicks, hasn't he?
Yes, he's done really well.
Fair play to you, Joe.
He's been great.
Well, look, before we continue further, we have got a taster of what our next series will be with the leader of Bridge Church, Andy Buttress.
There's a contemporary poet called Steve Turner who has written this little poem that goes like this. History repeats itself. It has to. No one listens. And at this time, we need to be people who listen and who learn, because we are living through momentous times. We think of World War I, we think of World War II, we think of 9/11. But this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, is up there. And in the future, this time will be remembered, not by just our own children, but, generations after that too. So we need to think about what we're learning from this time. We talk about the new normal, but what's to say that in a year's time, that new normal will look very much like the old normal? Things will be just back to normal. But we must learn from this time. And when we do life stories in August, we're going to look at some of the subjects that we need to consider about how we're learning and what we're learning as we go forward into the future, so that the world is a better place. I like the story that has come out over the last few weeks about Marcus Rashford, the England and Manchester United footballer, who grew up on a impoverished estate in Manchester, Wythenshawe. He knew what it was to experience poverty and hunger. And then over the last few weeks, when he realised that the government was withdrawing funding for meal vouchers for children on the poverty line, he started a campaign and wrote to people of influence and managed basically to overturn the government's policy, and now 1.3 million parents can access meal vouchers over the summer. You see, he remembered his past, he remembered his experiences, and that is exactly what we need to do regarding this time that we've just come through and the time we're in now. We've got to remember what we've gone through and learn from that. So what are you learning from this time? And that's what we're going to look at in Life Stories. Now, if you want to be a part of that, why don't you send in a 1-minute video telling us what you have learnt through this time. Send it to Kori at bridgechurchipswich.org.uk. Send it to her within the next few weeks, maybe by the end of July, and you can be part of Life Stories in August. So join us in August for this really important series, Learning from Lockdown. Because if we don't learn from lockdown, history might repeat itself.
I don't know about you, Kori, but I'm really looking forward to the new series that will soon be starting. Do make sure you send in your videos of lessons learned.
Absolutely. And in a similar vein, we've had some videos in this week of lessons people have learnt from our mental health and wellbeing series. So first off, we're going to go over to Helen, followed by Derek and Louise.
I found the mental health series really helpful. I thought that the talks were really relevant. The people who were interviewed were sincere and open and real. And I felt that the highlight was Keith and his negative thinking football quiz. And that's because I could just really see myself doing all of the things that he talked about. And I thought it was funny, but it really spoke to me as well. The key idea, I think, about it being okay not to be okay, that really stuck with me as well. And Ubuntu, the fact that we're all in it together and that we can be honest and vulnerable with each other as a community. We always have the option to share with one another if we're in a moment that we're not feeling okay. I remember when Matt named lots of big names from the Bible who didn't really have it all together, even though they always appear to, and we don't really look for or think about the side of them that is the side that doesn't have it all sorted out. But the week that really spoke to me the most personally was the perfectionism week, because I'm absolutely an expert at finding the speck. But I've learned that I need to probably take myself a little less seriously and let that inner carer rule over the inner critic. And I need to actually take it on board and accept that I am loved unconditionally just as I am. But anyway, thank you to everyone who's spoken and to everyone who's given an interview. I really felt that the whole series really helped me. Thank you.
So, Bridge Church has just finished its series on life stories about mental health and wellbeing. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's been a very useful series. The honesty that people have talked with, both those who have been given the talks and those who have been interviewed, has been really refreshing. I think it's really great that the church has attempted and achieved the ability to look at an issue that can be hidden under the carpet.
I agree. I think it's really refreshing that the church is able to pick that up and look at real issues and not come away with easy answers, because actually there aren't easy answers. I think one of the things for me was the fact that we all feel different things at different times, but actually that's okay. It's okay to not feel great. It's okay to not have those things around us, but it's really important that we remember we are a community, that we are there for each other, and that God can really use those different things in our lives to help us and to help people around us.
And that whole sense that actually, even if we've been through difficult times, that God uses those of us that have been through those difficult times, and nothing is ever wasted. Wow. That's really exciting to hear that.
Thanks, Bridge Church.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for sending those in. It's really interesting to hear your thoughts, and we've got a couple more for you later on this morning.
We have. But now we have got part one of a two-part talk from leader of Bridge Church, Andy Buttress, as he brings this current series to a close and summarises all that we have learned. So whether you've been here for the whole series or this is your first time, there's still a lot of interesting stuff in this talk for you. So grab your cuppa, sit back and listen in.
Good morning. I want to ask a couple of questions first of all before we get cracking this morning. The first one is, what is Boris Johnson's middle name? Well, the answer is Boris. I mean, he's not called Boris Johnson. He's called Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. So there you have it. The second question I want to ask you is, during this pandemic, which age group has struggled most with mental health issues? The Mental Health Foundation has produced a report called Mental Health in the Pandemic. And they have acknowledged in this report that even though we've all been in the same storm, we have been in different boats. We've all approached this with different life circumstances, socio-economic situations, and it has been different for every one of us. But they take various categories of people and highlight how many have found it difficult during the pandemic. And the age group that they have said have found it most difficult during the pandemic is the 18 to 24-year-old age group. Now, haven't got time to go into the reasons that they suggest for this, only to say that this age group have reported feelings of hopelessness and not coping more than any other, and including suicidal thoughts. But apart from this age group, they highlight the elderly who have particularly struggled with loneliness. They've highlighted those who have been physically ill and therefore who have been high risk. Single parents, with children at home, but also the work and finance. And then there are those with existing mental health conditions who have struggled during this time, and often they've only got worse. And then there's this wide group of people who perhaps have socio-economic inequalities. So they've got low incomes, they live perhaps in smaller houses, more crowded houses, and perhaps no gardens too. So there's been a whole raft of people who have particularly struggled with mental health during this pandemic. And I get that, and I'm sure kind of you get that too. But there is a nagging question that won't go away, and which I've had well before this pandemic, and it goes like this: why is it that in the UK, in our Western society, where we have a high standard of living, where, well, certainly before the pandemic hit, we had perhaps more people in work than ever before, we've got more educational opportunities, we have advanced medical knowledge and healthcare provision, we have a higher life expectancy and a lower infant mortality. We have more leisure time than ever before. We have great scientific know-how, and we have advanced technology. How is it with all of this in place, 1 in 4 of us have some diagnosed mental health issue? That is the question that I'm continuing to struggle with. And I think this morning, what I hope to do as we kind of sum up the mental health and wellbeing series that we have been going through since the 3rd of May, as I sum that up, I want to put out there a suggestion as to what might be the answer to that question. And the framework that I want to use to do that is actually just a few verses from the Bible, something that Jesus did that was recorded by Matthew, one of his disciples, in his gospel, which he wrote about the life of Jesus. So we pick this up in Matthew chapter 8, verse 1, where it says, "When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said, 'be clean.' And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, 'See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them.'" So that's the story from Matthew that I just want to use as a framework to look at what might be a possible answer to that question I had just posed. Because you see, I think The key things here are all about detachment, isolation, and disconnection. Those are the things that, if they are happening, that we are susceptible, more susceptible to struggling with our mental health. Detachment from ourselves, and I'll explain that in a minute. Detachment from others, and detachment from God. So in this passage, Jesus heals a man of leprosy. And if you had leprosy in those days, you were thrown out of your village or town. You became an outcast, you were excommunicated, you were rejected, you just had to leave family and friends, and you became part of a leper colony. It was like being quarantined for life. It was like being told to socially distance forever. And just imagine that. We could perhaps understand that a little bit more, having gone through this pandemic, what that would have been like for someone who developed leprosy. So in this story, we read that Jesus is on a mountain with crowds of people, and suddenly a leper appears. He should not have been there. He was breaking all social convention. And the crowd must have been horrified to see a leper in their midst. And he says to Jesus, you know, if you are willing, you can heal me. You can make me clean. Rather than Jesus being horrified, he does something, well, rather horrific. He actually extends his hand and touches this man. In those days, leprosy was considered to be probably more contagious than it actually is. I mean, it is contagious. It's a bacterial infection. But for the people there, they would have been absolutely horrified that a man like that was in their midst and that Jesus actually touched this man. But he did it. And in doing so, he healed the man instantaneously. Now, what that did was that it's completely restored that man. It made that man rethink the way he thought about himself. It made others rethink the way they thought about him. And it made perhaps everyone rethink about what it was to reconnect with God. You see, that man would have felt that he was the scum of the earth. He had been rejected by all. He was living as a leper, as an outcast. So when Jesus dared to touch him and heal him, he suddenly was not this unclean, detestable person anymore. He was a person who could be loved again. He was a person who he could accept. So it would have changed his thinking about himself. And of course it would have changed other people's thinking about him too. He could be welcomed back home, literally into his own family and into the communities he was a part of. He could hug people again. He could see his children again. And it would have made him and others rethink their understanding of God. Because the religious understanding of the day was that if someone got leprosy like this, they were cursed by God, that they were unclean, that they were literally untouchables. And yet, when Jesus touched this man, it showed the people that this man wasn't cursed, he was loved. He was a special human being, as special as anybody else. So what we find in this whole passage is that Jesus restores an individual, but the purpose of it is to restore that individual back into community and for people to form a new understanding about the love of God. So with this in mind, I want perhaps now just to briefly look at these three areas, ourselves, myself, others, and God, and see how that works out in terms of mental health and well-being, in terms of not being isolated or detached anymore, but in terms of being reconnected and brought back home.
Thanks, Andy, for that first part, and we look forward to delving a bit deeper with you in the second part in a few moments' time.
We do. And now we have a couple more videos for you of lessons that others have learned in this series. So we are going over to Donna first of all, and then over to the South family, where Graham and Alex are being interviewed by their daughter Martha. Over to you guys.
I'm outside in the fresh air, Kori, and I wanted to say what I have enjoyed most about the life stories is how I've got to know so many people at a deeper level. And I think that's something that we often don't get in church, the opportunity to really hear people's stories. I loved the bit where Andy talked about shame being like an egg cracked in your pocket and rolling down the inside of your leg. That really taught me something. And the other thing was learning about running as a spiritual act, and that was really, really inspirational for me. I hope that will do. Oh, the final thing, Jono talking about loss. That was really great to see a man talking so vulnerably and yet powerfully about loss. Thank you.
So, Mum, were there any part of Bridget's series on mental health that you connected most with?
I connected with a lot of it, but the two that stand out for me really were the ones on shame and forgiveness. So, first of all, shame. I just thought it was really courageous to have somebody speak so directly to something that quite often is a hidden thing. Shame was really good, and I thought Andy's use of a lot of words around shame were really courageous too. And I think for me it spoke quite deeply to something that I've struggled with over many years, so I was really grateful for that. And then linked to that was the one on forgiveness, and I just felt that was really applicable to me personally. I think when we think about relationships that aren't easy or are broken, I've often thought that because I've forgiven, I should therefore be able to reconcile. But just to hear in that talk that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation, and that if you've done your best, that is all that you can do. And so that for me was just incredibly powerful. So yeah, those two really for me.
Okay. And Dad, was there anything that you felt you have been able to apply already from what we have listened to?
There's a couple of things again really for me. Obviously some tough issues that have been raised, but good to talk about. There's a couple of things that I think I've learned about embracing some of the challenges really. If I take the subject of loss, more recently been talked about, I like most people have experienced loss from family members to friends, loss of dreams and of hopes and all those sort of things. Yet I struggle with the change that comes about from loss. And I think it's been a real challenge not to fear that change, but to embrace it. And certainly as a couple of things I can think of specifically where I've struggled with, losing something or somebody, and it's sort of the shadow of that to some degree will linger, but I've been able to specifically think about how God's plans will come through that situation as I learned just to embrace it and engage with it. So loss was certainly a very helpful one that I've really managed to take on board. And the other one was perfectionism, actually. That for me hit a bit of a nail on the head in the sense of I'm someone who likes things just right, just to be in a certain shape and have a certain look about them. And certainly there's a couple of areas in my life, thinking of home and family, home life and work life, where that really needed to be looked at. And the phrase that came out from thinking about that for me was learning to embrace what's actually in front of me rather than what I wish was in front of me. And that's sort of stuck with me quite strongly and actually practically made a big difference to how I'm sort of facing those particular situations. So that's been really helpful, and I've been grateful for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks guys, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for getting in touch with that. We're now going to go back to the second part of this morning's message from leader Andy Buttress. So sit back and enjoy the rest of that cup of tea.
So sometimes we can become isolated from who we are. I can remember watching in March of this year, Stacey Dooley on the psych ward. It was filmed at Springfield Hospital in London, and she spent about 3 weeks with the guests or patients in that hospital who were suffering from extreme mental illness. And one girl was a girl called Laura. Laura had been found by the police on a bridge contemplating suicide. And in talking to Laura, Stacey Dooley was really talking about her self-worth, her identity, and how she saw herself. And Laura said these words, and you can find them on iPlayer if you want to. She said, "Living with anorexia is like living with this monster who makes you feel so low and so disgusting that you become self-critical. It's like torture. Social media," she says, "definitely plays a part in my life. I have over 18,000 followers on Instagram. I feel like it's the only place I can become accepted and be honest. And I actually find that when I'm relapsing, I have more followers, which is kind of hard because then I feel people only care when I'm struggling." So those were her words. And as I was listening to those words, I thought, Laura, you have a distorted view of yourself. You're not seeing yourself as you really are. And I can remember, a couple of weeks ago when I did a talk on self-acceptance, I used the analogy of mirrors, saying that sometimes we can look into a mirror and not see actually what's there. Mirrors do lie. If they are, concave or convex, they will show a distorted image of who we physically are. And often that is the case, not just physically, but in our whole person. We don't actually see who we are. We have this distorted image. We're detached from the reality of who we are. And as self, we cannot see properly sometimes who we are. We need others to tell us. Perhaps we even need God to tell us. So we can be isolated from who we are, our true image, our true identity. And then we can be isolated from others too. We can be isolated from our family and from friendship groups and from community and even from church. And this has been one of the hard things about lockdown, hasn't it? That isolation has often felt more intense, even though we've become connected perhaps with others we didn't think we would. And in that first week, when we first introduced the whole subject of mental health and well-being, I raised a concept called Ubuntu. Ubuntu is perhaps best defined by that little phrase, "I am what I am because of who we all are." My identity, my worth, my well-being doesn't come from just myself. It comes from yourself. It comes from others. It comes from community. And when community is working well, when family, when friends, when church is working well, when there are positive relationships, when my well-being is enhanced by the community I am in, then I sense Ubuntu. To be isolated and detached from others is only going to lead to our mental health and well-being diminishing. And then there's this isolation from God. We can become isolated from God. God wants a relationship with you. This whole talk is about relationship, relationship, relationship. And God wants relationship with you. He wants you to be a child of his. He wants you to be part of his family, and he wants you to follow Jesus in order for that to happen. John, who was a disciple of Jesus, said, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are." So I hope that during this series, you have felt maybe that you can come back home to a relationship with God. Come back home to being part of people who call themselves church. Even coming back home, literally, to be part of family again. And so, yes, I do hope and pray that this series has helped you to connect, help you to be attached, help you to have that sense of belonging once more. So I pray a blessing upon you, that this series will have been a real help to you, and that you will be able to now pursue relationship in so many different ways. Take care, and God bless you.
Thanks, Andy, so much for that talk. And guys, look, I hope you found it beneficial. If that's the first time you've tuned in to us, or you've been watching the whole series, I really hope that was useful. And keep learning those lockdown lessons.
Absolutely, because every day is a school day. Like, for example, did you know pineapples grow on plants, not trees?
Wow.
I know. Mind blown when I found out.
Every day is a school day, right?
Every day.
Has your pineapple plant got a name?
Yeah. Pedro.
Pedro the pineapple plant.
Here he is.
Very good.
So please do send in your videos if you've got anything to share, and we will include it in the session next week. But for now, have an absolutely fantastic week. Enjoy the sun, she says.
Yeah, we hope so. Have a great week, and we'll see you at the same time, same place next week.
Bye.